We have a lot of activists here today, people that are tackling these problems at the grassroots level. But what does the federal government think of the state of diversity and inclusion in tech? Well, let's ask a United States Congressperson. Please welcome Congressperson Barbara Lee of California and your moderator, Henry Pickavett. This was recorded a couple days ago.
Congresswoman Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I want to start off with the Congressional Black Caucus, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And it formed with 13 members, and you are one of its 58 members now. Can you talk to us about the importance and the significance of the caucus to the country?
Sure, thank you very much, because this is the 50th year. It was founded in 1971. 13 members of Congress then who were African-American, included our beloved, the late Ron Dellums, who I had the privilege to work for. I didn't actually start working for him until, the summer of 74 as an intern, then went back in 1975 to DC to head up his office. And so I saw the Congressional Black Caucus grow, but I also, as a staffer, but I also saw how they were truly the conscience of the Congress, because these 13 members of Congress on each and every issue, they push the envelope for justice, for racial justice. Yes, for the African-American community, but in their initial founding statement, they said for all marginalized communities in this country. And so if you fight for justice for African-Americans, you're fighting for justice and equality for everyone who has been left out of this country's promise of the American dream. Shirley Chisholm was the first African-American woman, and she was one of the founders, and she mentored me, and she was the first person who got me actually to register to vote and to get involved in politics. And I saw how Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm had to fight just to have a seat at the table. She had to fight just to be heard. This was with the men in the Black Caucus and everyone on the Hill, but she wouldn't back down, and she just said, I'm here and I'm here to stay. And she fought through all of the sexism and racism. And finally, I'll just say, when you look at the Black Caucus's agenda then and now, you'll see that we're still following in terms of our fight on the legislative level, organizing around the country for racial equity, economic equity, and justice for the African-American community, for poor people, for low-income people, and for people of color.
Well, yeah, and you talk about access to the American dream and all of that. And so the caucus a few years ago, you and a few others went to Silicon Valley, and you sat across the table from CEOs from big companies like Apple, and you met with Tim Cook, you met with Jack Dorsey, and you talked to them about the lack of diversity in tech, and then specific plans around equitable hiring and all of that. How satisfied are you with the progress, if any, that has been made since then?
Well, let me tell you, we made many trips to Silicon Valley and to New York, and have met with the tech sector over and over and over again. We see a glimmer of hope, but not much. When you look at the numbers of the workforce in terms of employees, I think we're looking from maybe as it relates to African Americans, maybe from 2 to about 7%, if that. When you look at the retention numbers, the cultural hostility in many respects that tech sector employees tell me they're faced once they're in, they don't stay a long time because the culture has not been culture friendly for African Americans and Latinx individuals. And so it's a problem, and we're going to keep pushing. I co-chaired Tech 2020, which we started 5 years ago. And we've heard so many excuses from tech sector. And I'm going to give you one example. We're pushing also for C-suite individuals who are Black, for executive level employees, for board members, for contracting, the suppliers, the whole 9 yards. And so one year we went to one tech company and they said, of course, oh, the board is full, but we don't have any openings. But the next openings we have, we will certainly try to identify African Americans for the vacancies. We went back the next year, there had been 4 vacancies, not one African American was appointed. And so it's just constant over and over and over again. And we've got to crack that culture. And I'm telling you, we've got to do it before we exercise our regulatory reform and our stick, because there is no way in America any tech sector, any company should have only, and especially in California, only 2 to 7% African Americans in the workforce.
So what is that regulatory plan?
Well, we're not going to talk about that yet, but all of us, including Congresswoman Waters, who's with me, and she handles the financial services. I handle appropriations. We have the members who are on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We have members who are with us on the Ways and Means Committee who handle trade. So we have Black members everywhere on key committees that are conducting oversight and making sure that the tech sector, especially those, many receive federal contracts and they're required to comply with Executive Order 11924, and they just don't. They get away with it. And so, no, I'm not satisfied. I think we made some progress. We see more diversity officers and more human resources officers who are African American, and I work closely with them, and I know the challenges that they're faced with. And so I try to help them from the outside to make those companies respond in a more adequate and in a fair and equitable manner.
Well, I suspect one of the excuses that you hear is the issue of the pipeline problem, which it's been proven it's a myth and people are doing research on it. So what do you say to that, to the people who use that as an excuse?
It's a total myth. First of all, I know African-American engineers, African-American professionals who, quote, qualify for these jobs, but I do know there's unconscious bias, i.e. racism in the companies. And so a lot of the companies have developed these anti-racist policies and programs where they try to do the deep dive and try to help people understand unconscious bias and what have you, but they don't take the results and implement them. And so it's just really, it's not good. When you look at the tech sector jobs, I believe it's about 40% are non-tech related. And so you can't tell me that we don't have African-American accountants and, auditors, African-American communications firms, all of the services that they buy, they don't contract with, and the non-tech jobs, they don't hire Black people for. And so it's a shame and disgrace, but we're going to keep pushing. And the pipeline it really is not an issue. I mean, I have now in our public schools, we don't have access to science and technology and for Black students and low income students. So when President Obama was in, I worked with him on his Computer Science for All initiative. I have legislation that would require funding for K through 12 for computer science for low income kids, girls, and people of color, children of color. Well, the legislation is moving, but in the meantime, as an appropriator, I put up to probably, and his called for 250 million. I think we put about 150 million in the accounts that would allow for this. So now we have a Department of Education that hopefully would use this money to send to the school districts with direction on what we say that should be done. So we're hitting it on all fronts, but they're using that as an excuse. We're not going to let them get away with it. We're circling the wagons, and we're going to make sure that this glass ceiling is broken.
That's great. You just mentioned the bill going through the Congress. When one of the things that the caucus focuses on too is the issue of the digital divide. And so when you have the access to the STEM education, there's another issue when there's a lack of access to computers and broadband. So what are your thoughts on that and addressing the digital divide issue that's been around since the mid-90s?
Yeah, and it's magnified during COVID-19. I mean, when you look even in my district, which is a very wealthy district and a very poor district, it's a tale of two districts. Young people don't have access to broadband, so they can't do distance learning during the pandemic. And so we had to work to get access for young people to get computers, iPads, access to technology and broadband. Even in my district next door to Silicon Valley, it's mind-boggling. And this is not only in my district, but it's around the country. And so in our COVID package, we have funding to help, provide funding for the infrastructure necessary for access to broadband so kids can have this equal educational opportunities during the pandemic. But we're going to put forth an infrastructure bill very soon. And it's not going to be just brick and mortar. It's going to include broadband as an element or a component of our infrastructure bill. Because when you look at, it's really tragic what has happened, which I knew, but you have parents who are essential workers, and they're working to provide essential services to keep this country going in much danger. They go home to themselves. Their children don't have access to broadband, and they're navigating all of this. And so everyone is falling way, way, way behind. If you're low income, if you're Black, you're people of color, and if you're essential workers. And we have a duty and responsibility to make sure these kids and senior citizens, so much now is like, you got to apply online. I know just with the COVID vaccinations, I'm trying to help develop strategies to get to those who don't have access to the internet, to figure out how they get appointments to go get their vaccinations. So this is a critical justice issue that has to be rectified because it's magnified now with COVID-19, the coronavirus, and seeing how so many people have been left behind.
Yeah. You mentioned your district in Oakland, and KPO Capital just got $125 million in funding just last week. And so I'm curious what you think about what that means to Oakland, not only Oakland, but also what it means to the tech industry as a whole. As you just referenced, Oakland having basically been next to San Francisco and Silicon Valley during the rise of the tech industry. And so what does a place like KPO and that funding mean to Oakland?
I say thank God for KPO, their Hidden Genius project. All of the work that they've done has been around racial equity. It's been about young people of color having access to the opportunities that this country provides. So I'm so excited that they're continuing with this work, and they're located in my district. Frida and Mitch KPO, they're not only smart people in terms of their work and the work that they do in terms of access and the staff that they hire, but they're also committed to racial equity and racial justice, and in terms of their venture capital strategies, in terms of how they seed firms to begin to enter into this space. What they do all over the state and the country is remarkable. And I'm so proud that they are in Oakland, because Oakland, I think, is a microcosm of all of the possibilities, but all of the challenges that we as African Americans and people of color have in America.
For sure. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to spend them talking about cannabis. You are on the Cannabis Caucus, and obviously we all well know that there remains a disproportionate number of Blacks incarcerated due to minor drug offenses. And the states continue to legalize marijuana, most recently in New Jersey. What are your thoughts on the fact that the disproportionate number of Blacks are able to take advantage of the capital that is now out there in the cannabis industry, which is growing?
Yeah. I co-chair the Cannabis Caucus, and the reason I was asked to co-chair several years ago is because it was all white males, and it's a bipartisan caucus. And so here comes Barbara Lee co-chairing, and so they had to look at racial equity and racial justice as part of our cannabis reform legislation, and they did. And so I have bills that actually were incorporated in what is known as the MORE Act, my Marijuana Justice Act, which expunges the records of all those convicted. And these were laws developed through this war on drugs that incarcerated and put so many Black and brown people at risk of never being able to move forward in their lives because they have a conviction on their record. So we want to expunge all the records. We want to make sure that marijuana, cannabis is descheduled, because until it's descheduled, even when states pass recreational and medicinal, the federal government can come in and vamp on these dispensaries and shut them down. So we've got to deschedule and not make it illegal at the federal level. So my bill does that, as well as making sure that we create a fund for restitution in many respects, a community development fund that provides for job training, education, housing, all of the aspects of what it means to move forward in this country. And so restorative justice is extremely important. These individuals were caught up in the war on drugs and unfairly were incarcerated and arrested. I also have legislation, it's called the Respect Act, which is about equity in the industry. The licenses, now as of last year, it was only maybe 1% or less that were granted to African Americans. We have to have, this is a $1 trillion industry. And I don't want to see I don't want to see what's happening in the tech sector happen in the cannabis sector now. So we're at the beginning of this. So we have in the MORE Action in my bills requirements to set up offices of equity and how you bring companies and help companies. I know in my own district, we have an office of equity to help them weed through the bureaucracy to get their licenses, but also access to capital. Sometimes it's $300,000 to $500,000 just for a license. So we have to make sure that that access to capital is not exclusionary, so that people say, well, you're eligible, but now show us where the money is. And so there are a lot of legs to this, but I am determined that we're going to see those who have been most affected by these horrific draconian war on drugs get access to the industry and to the benefits. These jobs, this industry creates jobs, good paying jobs. They create economic opportunities, and they create community reinvestment opportunities. And so why not? And we've got to move forward, and we're making a lot of progress. We got the MORE Act off the floor last Congress. It didn't make it through the Senate, but Senator Harris, Vice President Harris, was carrying it in the Senate. So we're starting all over again in the House. We'll get it to the Senate. Let's see what they do and get it to the Biden administration. But finally, let me just say, legislation takes a long time. So we're working with the Biden-Harris administration now to try to do some things. I mean, we sent them a letter suggesting they just go on and give pardons to those who have been unjustly or clemency and convicted. We got a note back from the White House saying that, well, at least they're making a little progress for those who work with the federal government and who have, especially young people who have been caught up and got caught, smoking marijuana, that they would try to make sure that that's not a ding on their record. So that it's incremental with the Biden-Harris administration, but we're making it bold. We're pushing hard. We want them to move forward and support the MORE Act and deschedule cannabis.
So we have just a couple more minutes. I just wanted the Congressional Black Caucus just announced its 100-day plan. How can you talk about that?
Sure, and we've been working very closely with the White House, and I'm really privileged to co-chair the Domestic Council part of our CBC plan with Senator Booker. And so a lot of this plan is working with the Biden-Harris administration to address the lives and livelihoods of those who have been, impacted by the coronavirus, which means targeting resources. And I've been working on legislation for the CBC and funding, which we're making progress on, to resources to Black and Brown communities for testing, tracing, contact tracing, and vaccine distribution. That's a high priority for the CBC. Also, livelihoods in terms of saving lives and livelihoods. What we're doing is we're putting more resources actually into this last package that we passed last night for community development financial institutions, for access to the loans and grants for Black and minority-owned businesses, because the first go-around, they were totally shut out. So we're trying to fix that as part of the CBC strategy. And we're working to make sure that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act gets passed. We put that up and working on that. We're working on My Truth Racial Healing Transformation Commission and reparations to try to make sure we get that done. And we're working also on the Voting Rights Act. We see states now that are just moving forward and double downing on, voter suppression efforts. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we've got to pass that. And so we have a whole, with 55 of us, we've got a lot of work to do, but thank goodness we have Vice President Harris and President Biden to work with.
100%. Well, Congresswoman Lee, thank you so much for joining us. It was an honor to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure. Nice seeing you.